The lymphatic system. Lymphedema is a term which indicates the collection of lymph in the intestinal tissues followed in the blockage of lymphatics. Collection of lymph in the intestinal tissues following the blockage of lymphatics. That is lymphedema. We know edema. So same case with lymphedema. Then some other aspects like maximum lymph flow rate. Lymph increases with increasing interstitial hydrostatic pressure and achieves a maximum at 1 to 2 mmHg interstitial pressure. At this pressure, the increased entry of fluid into the lymphatic capillaries is opposed by the interstitial compression of the opposite outside surfaces of large lymphatics, thus impeding lymph flow. First topic, formation of lymph. Lymph is derived from interstitial fluid that flows into the lymphatics. Therefore, lymph as it first enters the terminal lymphatics is almost the same composition as the interstitial fluid. The protein concentration in the interstitial fluid of most tissue averages about 2 gram per dl, and the protein concentration of lymph flows from these tissues is near this value. Lymph formed in the liver is a protein concentration as high as 6 g per dl, and lymph formed in the intestine as a protein concentration as high as 3 to 4 gram per dl. Because about 2/3 of all lymph normally is derived from the liver and intestine. The thoracic duct lymph, which is a mixture of lymph from all areas of the body, usually has a protein concentration of 3 to 5 gram per dl. The lymphatic system is also one of the major routes for absorption of nutrients from the gastrointestinal tract, especially for absorption of virtually all fats in food. Indeed, after a fatty meal, thoracic duct lymph sometimes contain as much as 1 to 2% fat. Finally, even large particles such as bacteria can push their way between the endothelial cells of the lymphatic capillaries and in this way enter the lymph. Bacteria can push their way between the endothelial cells of the lymphatic capillaries and this way they enter the lymph. Bacteria enter the lymph. As the lymph passes through the lymph nodes, these particles are almost entirely removed and destroyed. Rate of lymph flow. About 100 ml per hour of lymph flows to the thoracic duct of the resting human, and approximately about 20 ml flows into the circulation each hour through other channels, making a total estimated lymph flow of about 120 ml per hour or 2 to 3 liter per day. Effect of interstitial fluid pressure on lymph flow. Normal lymph flow is very little at interstitial fluid pressures, more negative than the normal value of minus 6 mmHg. Then the pressure rises to 0 mmHg. Atmospheric pressure. Flow increases more than 20-fold. Therefore, any factor that increases interstitial fluid pressure also increases lymph flow if the lymph vessels are functioning normally. So, any factor that increases interstitial fluid pressure also increases lymph flow if the lymph vessels are functioning normally. Such factors include the following: elevated capillary hydrostatic pressure, decreased plasma colloid osmotic pressure, increased interstitial fluid colloid osmotic pressure, then increased permeability of the capillaries. All of these factors cause a balance of fluid exchange at the blood capillary membrane to favor blood movement into the interstitium, thus increasing interstitial fluid volume, interstitial fluid pressure, and lymph flow all at the same time. Interstitial fluid pressure becomes 1 or 2 mmHg greater than atmospheric pressure. Lymph flow fails to rise any further at its higher pressures. This results from the fact that in increasing blood tissue pressure not only increases entry of fluid into the lymphatic capillaries but also compresses the outside surface of the larger lymphatics, thus impeding lymph flow. At the higher pressures, there are two factors balance each other almost exactly. So, lymph flow reaches a maximum lymph flow rate. Compress the outside surfaces of the larger lymphatics. Okay, maximum lymph flow. This is illustrated. So, lymphatic pressure increases lymph flow. Valves exist in all lymph channels. When collecting lymphatic or larger lymph vessels becomes stretched with fluid, the smooth muscles in the walls of this vessel automatically contracts. Furthermore, each segment of a Lymph vessel becomes successive valves function as a separate automatic pump. That is, even slight filling of segment causes it to contract and the fluid is pumped through the next valve into the next lymphatic segment. This fluid fills the subsequent segment and a few seconds later it too contracts. The process of continuing all along the lymph vessel until the fluid is finally emptied into the blood circulation. In a very large lymph vessel such as a thoracic duct, this lymphatic pump can generate pressures as great as 50 to 100 mmHg. Pumping caused by external intermittent compression of the lymphatics. In addition to pumping caused by intrinsic intermittent contraction of the lymph vessel walls, any external factor that intermittently compresses the lymph vessel also can cause pumping. The order of their importance, these factors are following, which are the pumping caused by external intermittent compression of the lymphatics, contraction of surrounding skeletal muscles, improve movement of the parts of the body, pulsations of the arteries adjacent to the lymphatics, compression of the tissues by objects outside the body. This may lead to heart vessels. Contraction of the surrounding skeletal muscle, movement of the parts of the body, pulsation of the arteries adjacent to the lymphatics, compression of the tissue by objects outside the body. The lymphatic pump becomes very active during exercise, often increasingly lymph flow to 10 to 30 fold. Conversely, during periods of rest, lymph flow is sluggish, almost zero. The lymphatic capillary pump. The terminal lymphatic capillary is also capable of pumping lymph in addition to the pumping by the large lymph vessels. The walls of the lymphatic capillaries are tightly adherent to the surrounding tissue cells by means of their anchoring filaments. Therefore, each time excess fluid enters the tissue and causes the tissue to swell, the anchoring filaments pull on the wall of the lymphatic capillary and fluid flows into the terminal lymphatic capillary through the junctions between the endothelial cells. Then, when the tissue is compressed, the pressure inside the capillary increases and causes the overlapping edge of the endothelial cells to close like valves. Therefore, the pressure pushes the lymph forward into the collecting lymphatic instead of backward through the cell junctions. The lymphatic capillary endothelial cells also contain a few contractile actomyosin filaments. For summary of factors that determine lymph flow. From the previous discussion, one can see that the two primary factors that determine lymph flow are the interstitial fluid pressure and the activity of the lymphatic pump. Therefore, one can state that roughly the rate of lymph flow is determined by the product of interstitial fluid pressure times the activity of the lymphatic pump. The lymphatic system plays a key role in controlling interstitial fluid protein concentration, volume, and pressure. It is already clear that the lymphatic system functions as an overflow mechanism to return excess protein and excess fluid volumes from the tissue space to circulation. Therefore, the lymphatic system also plays a central role in controlling the concentration of proteins in the interstitial fluid and volume of interstitial fluid and interstitial fluid pressure. Let us explain how these factors interact. First, remember that small amount of proteins leak continuously out of blood capillaries into the interstitium. Only minute amount, if any, of the leaked protein return to the circulation by way of the venous ends of the blood capillaries. Therefore, those proteins tend to accumulate in the interstitial fluid, which in turn increases the colloid osmotic pressure of the interstitial fluid. Second, the increase in colloid osmotic pressure in the interstitial fluid shifts the balance of forces at the blood capillary membranes in favor of fluid filtration into the interstitium. Therefore, in effect, fluid is translocated osmotically outward through the capillary wall by proteins and into the interstitium, thus increasing both interstitial fluid volume and interstitial fluid pressure. Third, the increase in interstitial fluid pressure greatly increases the rate of lymph flow, which in turn carries away the excess interstitial fluid volume and the excess protein that has accumulated in the spaces. Thus, once the interstitial fluid protein concentration reaches a certain level and causes comparable increase in interstitial fluid volume and pressure, the return of protein and fluid by way of lymphatic system becomes great enough to balance the rate of leakage of these two in the interstitium from the blood capillaries. Therefore, the qualitative value of all these factors reach a steady state and they will remain balanced at the steady state levels until something changes the rate of leakage of proteins and fluid from the blood capillaries. The function of the lymphatic system are comprised role of absorption of nutrients, especially fats, from the gastrointestinal tract, role in immunity, regulate interstitial fluid protein concentration, regulation of interstitial fluid volume, and regulation of interstitial fluid pressure. Significance of negative interstitial fluid pressure as means for holding the body against together. Traditionally, it has been assumed that the different tissues of the body are held together entirely by connective tissue fibers. However, connective tissue fibers are very weak and even absent as many places in the body, particularly at points where tissues slide over one another, in the skin sliding over the back of the hand or even the face. Yet, even at these places, the tissues are held together by the negative interstitial fluid pressure, which are actually a partial vacuum. When the tissue lost their negative pressure, fluid accumulates in the spaces and the condition is known as edema. When the tissue loses their negative pressure, fluid accumulates in the spaces and the condition is known as edema.